Hi, and welcome to my presentation on Redressing Hofstede's Individualism scores with a new index from nationally representative surveys, which is a paper I have been working on together with my collaborators Michał Minkov, Christian Berzel, and Vivian Binoles. This paper deals with one great man's legacy. That man here on the picture is Gerrit Hofstede, who was the pioneer in quantifying dimensions of culture and was the person who triggered my interest in studying culture in the first place. Hofstede's model, of which individualism is by far the most prominent cultural construct, has been widely celebrated, and Hofstede remains one of the most cited and influential social scientists of all time. New studies that use his dimensions grow like mushrooms literally every day, even in the most prestigious outlets like Science and Nature and so on. As we know, however, these scores are based on data from around 1970, and there are obvious reasons why we should question their accuracy at present, knowing how much our world has changed since then. Therefore, we have three goals for our study. First, we want to evaluate the current validity of Hofstede's individualism collectivism scores. Second, we want to compare Hofstede's scores to newer individualism collectivism scores in empirical analysis. And lastly, we want to offer an alternative with the most recent data from the World Value Survey. Now, let's first begin with the definition of individualism. We quote and mostly agree with Hofstede on distinguishing between individualist societies, where ties between individuals are loose, and collectivist societies, where individuals are integrated into strong, cohesive in-groups. However, we have serious doubts over his rankings of the countries on this index, where the United States and other English-speaking countries are depicted as the most individualistic, while East Asian countries score considerably lower and get labeled as prototypical collectivist cultures. That may or may not have been to some extent true in the 1970s, but we strongly disagree with Hofstede that national culture should be considered as unchangeable as the geographic position or its weather. So first, we want to compare Hofstede's individualism scores with these from 5 measures of individualism and similar dimensions, which are based on more recent and more representative data. These are namely individualism, collectivism by Bogelsdijk and Belzel and by Minkov, emancipative values by Belzel, self-expression values by Engelhardt, and autonomy versus embeddedness values by Schwartz. Although they are not conceptually identical with individualism, they're sufficiently close to serve as a point of comparison. When we correlate all these 6 dimensions, we find that Hofstede scores correlate with the others on average at 0.73, which means 53% shared variance, which is decently strong. But the other 5 measures correlate with each other at 0.85, or that is almost 20% more shared variance than Hofstede scores. And this is quite substantial difference. Moreover, there are systematic differences between Hofstede and all other measures. When we take the average of the other measures and compare them to Hofstede's country scores, we find that all English-speaking country scores are strongly overestimated, and that is by as much as 35 points on a 100-point scale for the United States, while the scores of all East Asian countries are underestimated. Then we want to compare how Hofstede scores fare in empirical analysis with the other individualism measures. We chose the question whether individualism predicts obesity, and we found 3 previous studies which indeed find individualism to be a strong predictor of obesity. Curiously, this study's theoretical framework is mostly based on the premise that the United States and Japan can be used to illustrate the role cultural variables play in obesity, since the 2 countries are the opposing ends of the individualism versus collectivism spectrum. But even though the United States and Japan are indeed the two opposites on obesity, they score practically the same on all individualism scores we know, aside from those from Hofstede. We decided to reanalyze the relationship in multivariate regressions with a bunch of plausible control variables. We confirm previous findings that individualism is a statistically significant predictor of both male and female obesity rates, but only if we use Hofstede's individualism scores. If we use any of the alternative measures, we find either no relationship, or in two cases, we even find the opposite, statistically significant negative relationship among women, which is overall extremely disturbing on the background of a looming replication crisis in psychology. But our goal was not simply to criticize Hofstede, but also to offer an alternative, which was supported even by Hofstede himself. We select a number of items from the latest wave that resemble as closely as possible Hofstede's definition of individualism collectivism. As a result, we created a formative index for 81 countries around the world, which were based on the following items grouped into 6 domains, namely personal autonomy, individual freedom, diversity tolerance, gender equality, secular identity, and outgroup trust. Then we compare the correlations between the novel individualism and the Hofstede's index on the one hand, with various societal indicators, which we know that should be highly correlated with individualism, such as quality of government, rule of law, liberal democracy, lack of corruption, human development index, and GDP per capita. All of these indicators were more strongly correlated with our novel individualism index than that of Hofstede. On average, the correlation was 0.83 or 67% shared variance for our index in comparison to 0.67, which means 22% less shared variance for Hofstede's index. Lastly, we want to see which index we can predict better. We use 2 different sets of predictors from previous literature. The first one with historical factors and the second one with contemporary factors of development. In both cases, we can predict our novel index far better than that of Hofstede. Moreover, the English-speaking and East Asian countries don't deviate from the regression line in our case, while when we predict Hofstede scores, both dummies for these cultural regions were statistically significant, meaning that we cannot estimate these scores accurately based on the known predictors of individualism collectivism. We list 6 potential reasons for these discrepancies between Hofstede and all other individualism scores, including ours. For me, the 3 most likely reasons are the following. The data were collected on average more than 50 years ago, and subsequent change was not in parallel in all countries. Second, the IBM employees, which were used as respondents, are simply not representative for these nations. And lastly, I want to demonstrate on the next slide the potential problem of face validity, as the items that were used by Hofstede hardly resemble anything close to individualism and collectivism, as defined by himself as loose ties between individuals and strong in-group. Feel free to pause and read to see what I mean here. Especially collectivism items capture things like training opportunities, working conditions, and use of skills on the job that have nothing to do with strong in-groups. The problem has been noted by others, including Hofstede himself, but still his index continues to be used by many as a sort of a golden standard for measuring individualism collectivism. In conclusion, we confirm that Hofstede's individualism index replicates fairly well, and I really mean it. But still, This index is considerably imprecise. It misclassifies whole groups of countries, especially English-speaking, as the most individualist, and East Asian as categorically collectivist. This leads to false stereotypes and flawed theorizing. Individualism, collectivism has, as a result, turned into an East versus West dimension instead of North versus South, as it should be, and was suggested even by Hofstede. This index performs less well in empirical analysis. It can lead to false positive or negative or completely opposite findings. For that reason, thousands of studies that use these dimensions may be invalid or flawed. And at the same time, there are more viable alternatives, not just the one we propose, but several others. And my firm belief after doing this study is that we should be very thankful to Hofstede for his contribution. But once and for all, we should retire his individualism and collectivism scores, and perhaps even all other indices, unless we find any new compelling evidence in his favor, which I highly doubt. So to illustrate the problem we have in cross-cultural psychology, at the moment we have the following choice. The old map that places all continents at approximately their correct place, but still grossly misrepresents their shape and position. Or a modern map, which is based on hundreds of satellite images, and therefore we have no reason to doubt its superior accuracy. I will leave that choice to you. Thank you very much for your attention and looking forward to your reactions and interacting with you at the conference.